Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the final of the first ever speed mooting plea in mitigation competition. So we have 6 finalists for today's competition.
May it please your worships, I appear in this matter on behalf of Peter Magnussen. As my learned friend has outlined, he entered a guilty plea on the 1st of December and the bench adjourned the matter for a pre-sentence report. Now, may I just check that that report has made its way to your worships? I'm grateful. I start by conceding that the combination of factors in this offence undoubtedly brings it within category 1 of the sentencing guidelines. Now, I would hope to be able to persuade your worships that notwithstanding the recommended starting point, you would feel it appropriate to impose a community order upon my client. And I'd like to draw your attention to the following factors in mitigation. My client has not only pleaded guilty at the first opportunity, and I know you will give him full credit for that, but he also made a full and frank admission of guilt at the police station. Now, I accept that initially he did give a false name. However, it is not uncommon for young people of his age and level of maturity to panic, and that is indeed what Mr. Magnussen did on that day. I would therefore ask you to bear in mind that this was a momentary lapse in judgment as opposed to a calculated attempt to undermine the police investigation. Now, without wishing to excuse Mr. Magnussen's offence, can I briefly outline some of the underlying factors behind his offending up until this point, which you'll see from paragraphs 4 to 8 of the pre-sentence report. I'd just like to briefly highlight the following. Mr. Magnussen left school at 17. He has, in effect, only used his ability to drive as a form of earning a living. He drinks to relieve stress, and this has meant that impulsively and under the influence of alcohol, he has broken the law on 2 previous occasions, and he's undoubtedly immature and has acted in such a manner. And your worships may feel, looking at the history, that his offending is now cyclical in nature. But I submit we now have an opportunity to break the cycle, and this falls into 2 parts, your worships. Firstly, he's sold his car, and whilst you might not think that this in and of itself is usually mitigation, in this boy's case, up until this point, it represented, in effect, his only means of earning a living. Secondly, out of the negatives identified in the PSR with gaming, he's found a positive. He has been chosen to participate in an oversubscribed gaming course, but that chance only comes around once a year, and it would allow him to channel what has previously been a negative into a shining opportunity that would both give him qualifications and subsequently open up new avenues of employment. Now, I think it's important just to add 2 more points today, your worships. Firstly, his family is everything to him, and he has realised that he has let them down repeatedly. He actively supports his grandmother's care, which is particularly important, as I'm sure you'll appreciate in this difficult period we all find ourselves in, and his absence would undoubtedly further burden his mother. And finally, your worships, it's hard to put into words the extent of his remorse. This offence has caused him to stop and reflect, and that shows real progression on his part. Now, I am, of course, aware that this is a common submission for counsel, but in this case, I hope the content of the pre-sentence report and the real concrete steps he's taken to change makes this clear. So in those circumstances, your worships, I hope you would consider the potential for this as a watershed moment for Mr. Magnussen, and I would ask the court to consider what could be gained in terms of his future contribution to society by sending him into custody, which would only have the effect of robbing him of the chance to change. So may I urge your worships to follow the advice of the probation officers as seen in paragraphs 10 to 11 of the pre-sentence report. However, if you're against me on that and are minded to impose a term of imprisonment, may I add 2 points. Firstly, in reality, the length of any immediate custodial sentence, given his guilty plea, would have little overall punitive effect. It would therefore be a more effective deterrent to suspend any sentence, which would also have the benefit of some rehabilitation. Now, I also realise it's a difficult submission to make, but may I invite you to consider the cumulative effect of the length of any extension of the driving disqualification and bear in mind the impact upon Mr. Magnussen of finding employment in the future. I submit that a non-custodial sentence would have the dual effect of punishing him and stressing the magnitude of the offence, whilst allowing him to have this possibly last opportunity to take a different path in life. Now, unless I can assist you any further, your worships, those are my submissions this morning. Thank you.
Your worships, if it pleases the court, my name is Mr. Doyle, and I appear on behalf of Mr. Magnussen in this matter. My plea in mitigation will initially focus on the offence itself by addressing the relevant provisions of the sentencing guidelines. I will then proceed to deal with Mr. Magnussen's personal relevant mitigating circumstances. The aim of my plea in mitigation today, Your Worships, is to invite the court to impose a 12-month community order requiring Mr. Magnussen to undertake 120 hours of unpaid work. Before we go any further, has Your Worships had the opportunity to read the pre-sentence report?
Yes.
I'm most grateful. Mr. Magnussen is under no illusion as to the seriousness of this offence, and this is shown by his continuous level of remorse since the commission of the offence. His contrition and awareness as to the severity of this misdemeanour is demonstrated by Mr. Magnussen's guilty plea at first instance on the 1st of December. My primary submission, however, is that the court should follow the recommendations as seen in the pre-sentence report, and in this situation, a community order is the most appropriate action to be taken. Mr. Magnussen accepts the Crown's case of the events that occurred. He is also remorseful for the following action: providing the police with false details initially. However, he did this as he panicked and soon corrected this wrong by cooperating and entering into a guilty plea. Mr. Magnussen also admits and regrets the dangers that he caused by driving at excessive speeds. It is submitted that this offence falls within category 1 of the sentencing guidelines, given the high level of culpability and greater harm. The applicable range, therefore, is a high-level community order to 26 weeks in custody. It is my submission to the court that although Mr. Magnussen was driving a significant distance for a reward whilst disqualified, he did not arbitrarily drive and carry out such a task for his own personal gain, but rather felt if he were able to earn some cash, he would not have to financially burden his mother with the costs required to attend the gaming course. Your Worships, you will no doubt be concerned with Mr. Magnussen's 2 previous convictions of driving with excess alcohol, pleading guilty on both occasions. It is clear that Mr. Magnussen has since changed his attitude to driving-related offences, as it is evident that he has taken responsibility for his previous actions, as it has compelled him to maintain an absolute level of sobriety. I submit to the court that Mr. Magnussen has demonstrated his desire to never make such a reckless mistake again. This can be seen in paragraph 9 of the pre-sentence report. Your Worships, Mr. Magnussen is only 21 years of age, who has only undertaken a delivery work in order to support himself and his goals since the age of 17. Mr. Magnussen is a young adult who lives at home with his mother and has formed a support bubble with his grandmother. Mr. Magnussen is an aspirational, caring young man who takes items to his grandmother's address, which is in walking distance, and he does so due to her fear of catching COVID-19. His mother is unable to undertake this task due to working 6 night shifts per week, and it would make it difficult for her to deliver items to his grandmother if a custodial sentence were to be given. It is clear how reliant his family are upon him. Mr. Magnussen has since sold his car, demonstrating his commitment to never repeat the offence of driving whilst disqualified again. It is clear that Mr. Magnussen has taken responsibility for his actions and wishes to create a bright future for himself, as he wishes to attend a gaming course which he fears he will not be able to if a custodial sentence is passed here today. Mr. Magnussen is aware that your Worships may be considering a custodial sentence, but having regard to his personal circumstances and especially his desire to enter the gaming industry, I submit to the court that a community order is the most appropriate action in this matter. Mr. Magnussen presents no immediate risk to the public and has showed significant changes to his attitude as he wishes to follow his goals and never to drive disqualified again. Therefore, as per the pre-sentence report, I invite the court to impose a 12-month community order with a disqualification period between 6 to 12 months. Whilst Mr. Magnussen accepts the inevitability of disqualification, it is one submission that the disqualification be kept to the shortest period that the court wishes to impose due to the inevitability of travel if he works in the gaming industry. However, if this is not possible, Mr. Magnussen fully respects the court's decision due to the nature of his actions. I ask the court to look at Mr. Magnussen's desire to move forward from his previous life of driving-related offences. Your Worships, that concludes my submissions unless I can assist you any further. Thank you.
May it please the court, my plea in mitigation today will briefly focus on the offence itself before dealing with the aggravating and mitigating factors. The aim of my plea in mitigation is to persuade the court to impose a high-level community order and a disqualification order of 12 months, plus any additional periods that must be added. Before we go any further, may I ask if your worships have had the opportunity to read the pre-sentence report?
Yes.
I'm grateful. Thank you, your worships. I do not seek to dispute the prosecution's submissions that this offence falls within Category 1. However, my aim is to persuade the court to impose a sentence at the lesser end of the sentencing range within Category 1, which highlights a starting point of a 12-week custodial sentence, but ranges from a high-level community order to a 26-week custodial sentence. Moving on from the offence itself, I now wish to address the factors indicating higher culpability and greater harm, as well as the 2 aggravating factors, before considering 3 mitigating factors. I first wish to address the fact that the defendant was driving 60 miles per hour in a 30 mile per hour speed limit. Mr. Magnussen understands the severity of his offence and that driving at such a speed was completely unacceptable. He has since sold his car, demonstrating that he does recognise the seriousness of his conviction and will not be driving again. He has also been placed within Category 1 as a result of the distance driven. However, on this point, I wish to note that this information came only from the defendant himself, and he has willingly cooperated with the police. The first aggravating factor that I wish to address is Mr. Magnussen's 2 previous convictions for drink driving. Whilst these are relevant offences, Mr. Magnussen has since made a conscious effort to change his behaviour and to stop drinking entirely. This, I submit, demonstrates not only a willingness, but a real desire to change. The second aggravating factor is Mr. Magnussen's decision to give false details to the police. This was, I submit, a temporary lapse in judgment and was quickly remedied, with Mr. Magnussen readily admitting that he had given false details, again demonstrating that he does acknowledge the wrongfulness of his actions. Moving on to the mitigating factors. First, Mr. Magnussen has shown genuine remorse for his offence. And if I may direct your worships to paragraph 9 of the pre-sentence report, where it is highlighted that he appears remorseful, and this is also reflected in his admission of guilt, both when interviewed at the police station and at his initial hearing. Second, despite his previous convictions, the defendant is of good character and has already demonstrated a desire to change in his decision to abstain from drinking and sell his car. He also wishes to improve his future employment prospects and has been accepted onto a computer course starting next month. Mr. Magnussen left school at the age of 17 and has since earned a living as a delivery driver. However, he wishes to gain a qualification from the computer course, which would enable him to work in the gaming industry. A custodial sentence would prevent him from taking this course, which only takes place once a year, and this would, in turn, have a negative impact on Mr. Magnussen's desire to improve his future prospects. Third, and finally, Mr. Magnussen is currently in a support bubble with his grandmother, who he helps by regularly delivering supplies, and he can continue to do this without driving. The defendant's mother works 6 nights a week and would struggle to provide the same level of support. It is submitted that a custodial sentence would have a significantly negative impact on Mr. Magnussen, and especially at a time when he has taken positive steps to change and improve his life and future prospects. I therefore invite the court to impose a high-level community order, as well as a corresponding disqualification order, with a reduction of a third due to the defendant's guilty plea at the initial stage of proceedings. If it is the court's view that a custodial sentence must be imposed, I would ask the court to suspend this sentence. Unless I can assist your worships any further, that does conclude my submissions.
Your worships, I ask the court today to follow the pre-sentence report and sentence Mr. Magnussen to a 12-month community order with 120 hours of unpaid work. This sentence is taking into account the early guilty plea discount of a third, the maximum which Mr. Magnussen is entitled to. Turning then to the categorisation of the offence, the matter before you is a Category 1 offence that is not challenged. Therefore, turning to the starting point and range, for Category 1, there is a starting point of 12 weeks custodial sentence and a range of a higher level community order to 26 weeks custodial sentence. Therefore, the 12-month community order is within this range, as well as being supported by the pre-sentence report. There are aggravating factors in this offence. Mr. Magnussen has previous convictions. However, these are more serious in the case at hand, and there was no alcohol involved in this current offence as there were in the previous two. Further, the second aggravating factor is that he did give false details to the police initially. However, this is outweighed by Mr. Magnussen's extended admissions in interview. There are further greater mitigating factors that the court will want to take into account. Firstly, Mr. Magnussen is remorseful. He demonstrates this by his admissions, as I previously mentioned, and this early guilty plea. Secondly, he cares for his maternal grandmother, who is housebound. If he were to serve an immediate custodial sentence, this would be burdensome for both his grandmother and his mother, who works for 6 nights a week. I'm sure the court will be well aware of the Court of Appeal case of the Crown and Manning that highlights that custodial sentences in the current climate are likely to be far harsher in light of pandemic situations. And this therefore should be borne in mind, particularly with regards to Mr. Magnussen's family. Thirdly, Mr. Magnussen has made genuine attempts to make positive life choices. He has a place on a college which could lead to a long-term career. A custodial sentence would place that at risk. He couldn't start the course, and there is no guarantee that he'd ever be able to get onto it again. This offence was born from the wrong and misguided view that Mr. Magnussen was working as a delivery driver to save for his college course, and he thought that this was a good idea. Whilst he now understands that this was wrong, he did it with good, if misguided, intentions. Finally, he has addressed the cause of his offending behaviour by stopping drinking and selling his car. This shows a genuine attempt to change. With regards to the amount of disqualification time, I asked the court today to give a disqualification period of 12 months. I appreciate that this is within the lower range of the time periods. However, I wish the court to bear in mind that Mr. Magnussen will need to perhaps drive to work in the future, and therefore adding this to the outstanding period of disqualification, this would be a period of 31 months disqualified. If the court is minded to pass a custodial sentence, I ask the court to suspend that sentence for a period of 12 months for the reasons I've outlined, that he is suitable for rehabilitation. So, your worships, justice is not served today by sending this man to prison. He is going to contribute to society, and you're not going to see him again before the court. He knows he has done wrong, and he knows he's going to be punished. And the probation officer recognises that he understands this. And the probation service, as the independent arbiter, recognises that he is suitable for either a community order or a suspended sentence. Unless I can assist any further, those are my submissions.
May it please the court. Before I begin, may I please check that your worships have received a copy of the pre-sentence report? I'm grateful. Your worships, I will first deal with the offence and then with the offender. I will respectfully request that the court follow the recommendations of the pre-sentence report and impose a high-level community order. Turning to the offence, the defence accepts that this is a Category 1 offence. This has a sentencing range of a high-level community order through to 26 weeks custody with a starting point of 12 weeks in custody. Now, I will address the numerous factors why I submit the sentence imposed by this court should be the lowest of this range. However, I respectfully request that the court also consider the alternative of a suspended sentence throughout the remainder of my submission. As your worships will know, Mr. Magnussen pleaded guilty at the earliest opportunity and is therefore entitled to a 1/3 reduction in sentence for his early guilty plea. As to the aggravating factors that apply in this case, I submit that they are outweighed by numerous mitigating factors. The main aggravating factors here are Mr. Magnussen's previous convictions and the fact that he gave false details. But as to previous convictions, whilst the defence accepts that these were of a similar nature as they were all driving offences, the cause of these convictions were different. As your worships will see at paragraph 8 of the pre-sentence report, Mr. Magnussen acknowledges his issue with drinking. He's now entirely stopped drinking and he has sold his car. I submit that there is now a significantly reduced risk that any similar or future offences will be committed by this defendant. As to providing false details, Mr. Magnussen did provide a different name upon being initially stopped by the police, but the court, as your worships will know, is required to consider the age and immaturity of the defendant when considering this factor. Mr. Magnussen is 21 years old and provided a false name simply because he did it out of impulse. He immediately corrected himself and has been nothing but open and cooperative with the court and the police ever since. As to my final point under this limb of my submission, the defendant has shown complete remorse for his offence. He was driving on the incident day purely because he wanted to provide for himself and his family and earn money during this difficult pandemic time. He accepts that what he did was wrong. Turning then to the offender, and there are a number of mitigating factors I submit relevant to Mr. Magnussen. I submit specifically that there are 3. Firstly, Mr. Magnussen left school at the age of 17 and quickly became a delivery driver in order to provide for himself. In short, your worships, being a delivery driver is the only way that Mr. Magnussen knew how to provide for himself. This brings me to my second point. As your worships will see from paragraph 7 of the pre-sentence report, Mr. Magnussen has been offered a place on a games course at college. This happens only once per year, and Mr. Magnussen is keen to undertake this opportunity and commence a career in the gaming industry. A custodial sentence would prevent him from doing so and would significantly hinder his future prospects. Finally, your worships, Mr. Magnussen does assist in caring for his elderly grandmother who's shielding for coronavirus. He provides invaluable assistance by providing basic goods and walking to his grandmother's house to deliver those. Your worships, if Mr. Magnussen were to receive a custodial sentence, not only would his future be impeded, but his immediate family, his mother and his grandmother, will be placed at a disadvantage too. To conclude, your worships, at paragraph 10 of the pre-sentence report, the recommended sentence is a 12-month community order with 120 hours unpaid work requirement. I respectfully submit that this is the correct sentence to be imposed. However, as I've said, Mr. Magnussen is an incredibly hard worker and would be more than willing to accept any amount of hours unpaid work that the court sees fit to impose, in addition to the shortest amount of time for additional driving ban. If I've been unable to persuade the court to impose a community order, I respectfully request that the court instead impose a suspended sentence and allow Mr. Magnussen to start to build his future. Unless I can assist the court any further, those are my submissions.
May it please the court, I am Susie Burley and I appear on behalf of the defendant, Mr. Magnussen. Your worships, Mr. Magnussen acknowledges the serious nature of this offence falling under category 1 in the sentencing guidelines. May I confirm whether you have had sight of the pre-sentence report? I'm grateful. Despite the despite the serious nature of this offence, in the circumstances, it is submitted that the court should follow the recommendation of the probation service in the pre-sentence report, namely a 12-month community order with a term of 120 hours unpaid work, or in the alternative, for the court to consider a suspended sentence. If I may move to my first submission, which relates to the nature of the offence. Mr. Magnussen has shown genuine remorse for the offence and recognises the dangers involved in his actions. While he momentarily gave the police a false identity, he did this in the panic of the moment because he knew what he had done was wrong. Mr. Magnussen quickly corrected the false information and cooperated fully with the police, making admissions straight away. He even admitted to the extent of the driving he had planned to do, which demonstrates his honesty and cooperation. While Mr. Magnussen acknowledges the error in his actions, at the time he was desperately trying to support himself to earn money with no other job prospects given his limited work experience and lack of qualifications. This was his first and only time driving since his most recent disqualification. With that said, Mr. Magnussen has learnt from his mistakes and has now sold the car and maintains he will not drive again during his disqualification. He has also indicated his plea at the earliest opportunity throughout proceedings and therefore qualifies for a 1/3 reduction on sentence. Your Worships, if I may now move to my second submission, which relates to Mr. Magnussen's character. He often supports his elderly grandmother, who is isolating and cannot leave the house. Although he has struggled academically, he has set out to work since a young age and has obtained a job in delivery driving, which he maintained for several years. He ultimately only lost this job because of his previous driving disqualifications. Your Worships, regarding these previous offences, I submit that they are not necessarily similar in nature, because as the defendant was not on this occasion under the influence of alcohol. Mr. Magnussen has recognised the error in his ways and has in fact stopped drinking altogether. This further demonstrates his determination to better himself and learn from his past mistakes. On this point, Your Worships, Mr. Magnussen has also been trying to better himself in terms of his career path. He is an avid gamer and is hoping to utilise this passion by pursuing a career in the industry. He has also been accepted onto a prestigious computer course, which may open up numerous employment opportunities for him in the future. This course starts next month and only runs once a year. If Mr. Magnussen was to face a custodial sentence, he would therefore have to forfeit his place and may not have another opportunity like this, given how competitive the course is. Moving then, Your Worships, to the sentencing guidelines. As a Category 1 offence, the starting point is 12 weeks custody, with a range from a high-level community order to 26 weeks custody. The offence also warrants a driving ban in the range of 12 to 18 months. It is submitted that on the basis of the mitigating factors outlined, the court should consider placing this offence at the lower end of Category 1. I invite the court to consider following the recommendations set out in the pre-sentence report, namely a 12-month community order with the unpaid work term of 120 hours. Mr. Magnussen is willing to undertake unpaid work if it means he can avoid a custodial sentence and undertake his computer course. It is submitted that any resulting driving disqualification should also fall at the lower end of the spectrum, namely a 12-month ban, which will then be added to the defendant's remaining 2-year and 8-month disqualification. Your Worships, if the court feels a custodial sentence is unavoidable, it is submitted that any sentence passed will be well under 2 years and should be suspended on the basis of the aforementioned factors. If I may also invite the court to consider the recent Court of Appeal judgment in the case of Crown and Manning. Here, the court confirmed that given the current pandemic, it is a legitimate factor for a sentencing court to consider the impact of COVID-19 on prison conditions, and this can be taken into account when deciding whether or not to suspend a sentence of imprisonment. On this basis, it is submitted that any custodial sentence passed should be suspended. If I can be of no further assistance to the court, that concludes my submissions.
Mr. Justice Brooke is going to deliver judgment on this one.
So assuming we are in court, Mr. Magnussen, stand up. I've listened very carefully to both what the Crown have had to say I've listened very carefully to what your counsel has had to say. I've also read in great detail the pre-sentence report provided by probation. I have to say, in no uncertain terms, I disagree vehemently with that document. I find that you are a repeat offender of this type of driving offence. At one point, it was referred to as a misdemeanor. I find that a particularly unattractive position to adopt in this offender's history. The fact he is 21 years old means nothing to me. He is old enough to make his own life decisions. He is quite competent in finding himself in trouble with the police and quite competent in deciding that he's going to drive and be dishonest about it. Not only was he dishonest to the police when they first arrested him, he was also dishonest, presumably, to his employer when he obtained the job, whilst being disqualified as a driving job. The fact of the matter is that he has to make money. Well, frankly, millions of people across the country have to make money and they don't turn to crime to do it. Therefore, I render this sentence. Mr. Magnussen, I give you a third credit for your guilty plea. You will be sentenced to 26 weeks immediate custody, of which you will serve, with your credit, you will serve 17 weeks. And of course, if you're good, you will get out earlier than that. I additionally attach a further 16-month disqualification. That will mean there will be a 47-month disqualification period. You will pay £100 in costs and £128 of a victim surcharge. Dock officer, take him down. Now, the winner is Paige, and the runner-up is Susie. We thought that both of you were exceptionally good. In fact, you were all exceptionally good and have all been exceptionally good during the course of this entire competition.